today. Thank you very much for joining. My name is Milton Bradbury. I'm going to give a small introduction. I'm an academic trainer. I used to be an English teacher, but now I train teachers. And today, the topic is using international English in the classroom. Why and how we should use it. So this is a session for teachers of English. You can be teachers of young learners, you can be teachers of adults of all ages, but the focus is for teachers today. And we're going to be looking at the topic of international English. So let's begin. I'm just going to start with a small introduction. So a little bit of information about me. I'm from England. I'm from London. Here you can see the flag of England, Argentina. Why Argentina? My mother is from Argentina. I was born in England, but my mother's from Argentina. So I speak Spanish and I have lived in Argentina and now Mexico for about 15 years. So I've lived in the Americas for a long time. Something about me here in the bottom left, you can see some computers. The reason I have this photo here is because some of my expertise as a teacher is using digital tools. I love using digital tools. I love using technology in the classroom. So I included a photo which represents some of my interests as a teacher and as a trainer. Next to that, you can see the British Council. I work for British Council Mexico, but I train teachers in Mexico, Colombia, Venezuela, and Chile. I visited all the countries. I love my job because I get to travel and visit the countries. 2 weeks ago, I was in Santiago. 3 weeks ago, I was in Bogota. And last year, I was in Caracas. And I try to visit as much as I can. Here is a photo of one of my personal hobbies. I love cooking. And living in Mexico, I have learned so many things. Recently, I think I have perfected mole de olla. That's my favorite dish at the moment to cook. I cook that for my wife. My wife is Mexican and she likes it. So I think I'm doing a good job. And finally, just here, I just have a photo here, which is of presentations. The reason why I've mentioned this is because I like speaking at conferences and I like doing teacher training. So I included this picture here. So that's some information about me. At the end of the session, I will share my email. So if you want to connect with me or if you have any questions, you can contact me via my email. Okay, so thank you guys. Let's start. Today, we are going to look at international English. So the objectives of today is first, we are going to look at what is generally taught in the English language teaching classroom. So what people generally teach. Then we're going to discuss why we should do more to teach international English. If you're not sure what international English is, don't worry, because we will look at it today. And then finally, the final objective is I will be providing some practical suggestions for you to implement in the classroom. So some ideas for activities and some ideas of how you can teach international English. Okay? As I said before, this is an interactive session. So there will be moments in the call where I ask for you to give me some feedback or your ideas. There will be moments in the call where I put you into breakout rooms to discuss. So please, if you don't want to put the camera, don't worry. That's not obligatory. If you want to, fantastic, great. But please do interact in the moments I ask you to, because this is it's a collaborative learning opportunity. So here we have some numbers. Can you take a photo? You can take a screenshot, photo with your camera. It doesn't matter. Please take a picture so you have this. Have you got it? I'm going to put you into groups and I want you to discuss what are these figures when we're talking about international English. So let's do one example. So in your groups, have a look at these numbers. What do they mean? Okay? So I'll put you for 3 minutes into breakout rooms, just 3 minutes.
See you back here in 3 minutes.
I don't know, maybe Spanish or something, but I don't know. I don't think so. I think that's a very small number for the people who speak Spanish. So I really don't know. But the point three, I would say that's, yeah, the amount of people who speak English. The 60% thing, I don't know. I have no idea, guy.
You should have taken this picture, okay? And we should be discussing these numbers.
Okay.
So, what do you think 2.3 million means?
3 million?
Talk about the population in the world or people who speak English. What do you think?
I think that nowadays speaking is really, really important because English is a universal language in any place.
Okay, guys, there was some good conversation and some problems with the internet. Maybe breakout rooms isn't the best activity, so you can experiment, right? With people in all different continents, all different countries, it's tricky. So I think I heard some interesting suggestions. I'm going to show you the answers. What do these numbers refer to? 2.3 billion, you're right. 2.3 billion. So 2.3 billion people use English as a first or additional language. That's a huge amount of people, many, many different people. 67 countries use English as their official language. Normally people think, in which countries do they speak English? And you talk about United States, Great Britain, Australia, South Africa. But there are 67 different countries which use it as their official language. 60% of all online content is in English, and 265 million speakers of English, 255 million, and 257 million in the USA. So actually, there are more speakers of English in India than there are in the USA. And in my country, in England, there are about 100 million. So what is the purpose of showing you these figures? First of all, English is not just British English. Only about 100 million out of 2.3 billion speak British English. So actually, it's not very common. Only 257 million people of 2.3 billion speak American English. So it's not actually that common. The English in the other parts of the world are much more common than the typical English is. Now, this is very important to know because what this means for us as teachers, well, one of the things it means is that British English is not necessarily the most important English for your students to learn. Maybe if their plan is to go and live in England, then maybe yes. But even then, it depends what part of England. Because if you live in London, you have people from around the world speaking different types of English. And when I say different types of English, I mean different accents, different dialects, different variants. So it's important to take this into consideration, okay? English is an international language. Now, what is actually taught in the classroom? In the English language teaching classroom. ELT is English language teaching. So there was a study by the British Council, and this was taken from 390 teachers around the world. Teachers in India, teachers in China, teachers from around the world. 85% of teachers say they teach the most common type of English. 89% say the materials they use teaches standard English. And the reason that people teach this is considered the easiest for everybody to recognize. It's the easiest for everybody to recognize. And that's important, right? Everybody can understand. Standard English is the easiest from wherever you are in the world to understand. However, it's important to understand that many people speak different types. And if you work in the international world of business, for example, if you work for an international company, the standard English is not necessarily the English you're going to hear and have to interact with. Even though standard English is the most easy, probably not the one you're going to encounter and you're going to have to deal with, basically. So what are some problems with only teaching standard English? So actually, standard English, the English that you see in course books, like English File, Cutting Edge, Headway, whatever, this form of English is usually only used by news presenters, people delivering the news on TV, and higher social classes. The standard English that I see in course books is not even the English that I use with my friends in London. That's important to realize. So actually, not that very few people use standard English. It doesn't reflect varieties of native speaker English. So there are different countries where English is the official language. For example, in India, it's one of the 6 official languages. Indian English is very different to standard English. English from Jamaica is very different to standard English. English from Nigeria is very different to standard English. English from Singapore is very different to standard English. So this is very important. It doesn't actually reflect what many people speak. The reality is, speaking perfect standard English is in fact very, very difficult and almost impossible for the majority of learners. It's not impossible, but it's very difficult for 95% of people. We won't, because of the context. If you live in Mexico and you only hear Mexicans speak English, or mainly hear Mexicans speak English, that's going to influence your English. And that's not a bad thing. The point here is that it's unrealistic to hope everybody sounds like a native speaker from England. It's unrealistic and it's very, very difficult. And if we only teach standard English, we are devaluing other varieties of English. We're saying that Indian English is not as important. We're saying that Nigerian English is not as important. Whereas actually, there are more Indian English speakers. There are almost 3 times more Indian English speakers than English speakers from England. So, it's unfair. It devalues the other Englishes. And it can promote discrimination. We're going to say, this in my time as an English teacher, I've heard people say, oh, I don't like Indian English. I don't like it. But that's, you don't like it because it's difficult for you, right? You're not accustomed to it. You haven't heard it much. So it's challenging for you. And we don't want to promote discrimination. So what should we do as teachers? Consider the teaching context. Okay, where do you teach? Who are your students? What is the objective? I'm not saying that every school should teach every different type of English. No, I'm not saying that, okay? Because that's very difficult as well. But for example, if you're in a school, in a language school in Chile, think about your students. So if you're teaching adults in Santiago in Chile, I will think about, why are you teaching English? Why are you learning English? And they will tell me, for example, they'll tell me, I need to be able to perform better at work. I have lots of interactions with people from China, and the language that we speak between Santiago and Beijing is English. And I'm finding it very difficult to communicate because of language issues. If we only teach standard English in that situation, we are not helping them reach their objective. We need to support them understand the differences between an English speaker from China and an English speaker from other countries. If we've got a secondary school in Mexico, children of a high school, why are they learning English? Well, maybe it's very important, even if you don't travel within the market in Mexico as they grow older and get jobs, to be able to speak English. Which type of English are they probably going to encounter most? Well, I don't like to make too much of an assumption, but my idea is probably American English. So it's useful for them to understand the differences between American English and standard English, for example. We need to value learners' English, okay? Part of becoming motivated, enthusiastic learner is becoming comfortable with the way we speak. It's very important that we say, oh, you don't want to sound Mexican, do you? Or you don't want to sound Chilean, do you? No, they are Mexican, they are Chilean. They're going to sound that way. It's almost impossible to lose the accent. It's very difficult. I've been speaking Spanish for 18 years and I still have a very strong English accent. And that's just me. That's my identity, right? It's not a problem. So we need to value their English. And we need to prepare learners for intercultural communication, similar to what I was discussing in the first point. let's have a look at some activities. Now, this is an activity taken from a course book, a very good English language course book called Navigate. It's Navigate Upper Intermediate. It's from Oxford University Press. Now, this is a very interesting activity. This whole lesson on this page was understanding the difference between typical American English and typical British English. How do they do that? There was a section on words, but this section is the difference in pronunciation. So, for example, you can see in the bullet points, they're explaining the differences here, okay? So the letter O can sound like O or O, okay? So, for example, in American English, they might say nut, but in British English, we'll say not. So the vowel of O sounds different depending on which variant or which accent, rather, okay? Strong and strong. Okay, so helping learners see the difference. Another point, how to pronounce the letter or the R sound. Okay, so for example, British English, ask, and American English is ask and ask, aunt and ant. Okay, so depending on where you're from. This lesson highlights the differences between the vowel sounds of two different Englishes, and it tests students. So, for example, in this activity 2.6, they listen to somebody say castle, and the learners have to deduce, is it a British speaker of English or American? And they deduce that by the sound of the vowel. So they circle the vowel sound. Okay. And then there are a succession of international English. There's a succession of activities making it testing learners on the difference between the two accents. Does anybody have any questions about this? Well, Jose is making a very important point. In the UK, there are different accents. For example, Scotland. Jose, you're totally correct. In the UK, there are so many different accents, okay? This activity is looking at standard British and standard American. In the UK, I'm from London, and within London, there are different accents. West London sounds different to East London. I'm from West London, but if I was from East London, I'd sound very different. Cockney, exactly, Jose. Yeah. So within the geographical area of London, there are a variety of accents. And then taking into account all the different nationalities, then they have multicultural Englishes as well. Ray says, can I say vegetables? I say vegetables, Ray. I hope that helps. Why are there so many different accents? It's a good question, Victor. Etymologist, accents, I don't know the answer to that. It's a very interesting question, but the fact is there is. What my job is to help students deal with the differences, how to manage them. But it's a good question. I'm going to investigate that actually, because I'm interested and I don't know why I don't know that. Thank you for pointing that out. All right, let's move on to another. It's important to tell learners to keep their accent. It does not, Lawrence, I 90% agree with you. If somebody wants to train to speak in a different accent, I don't like to say, no, don't do that. It's your decision. But what I do try to do is make sure people are aware that it's not, there are so many different types of accents. Really and truly, training to speak a perfect West London accent is not it's very difficult, basically. And the important thing is that you're understood. So if you're proud with your accent, then great, fantastic, keep it with that. Yeah. Spanish is similar, right? Okay, great. Let's move on, guys. So teaching pronunciation. This point I'm going to make is a little bit controversial because many English teachers love teaching pronunciation. And I like teaching pronunciation too, but I'm careful about what I teach and when. Some features of pronunciation that we see in materials maybe are not that useful. So for example, the TH sounds, the, those, these. I don't say that. I don't say the. Well, I say the. I don't say, for example, three. I don't say three. I say free because I come from West London. And in West London, we have very, very weak TH sounds. Often we change TH to F. And many, many speakers from around the world learning English, it's easier to say the F sound than the sounds, right? So that is what they developed. I'm not saying don't teach it at all. This is what standard English is. But I do think is don't insist on it from your students. If your students are saying free instead of three, that's not a big problem because that's what many people do, including native speakers. Vowel quality. So don't be so strict about what a should sound like. A German speaker might pronounce like eh. So, for example, they might say chess instead of chess. They might say cut instead of cat. Okay. How important is it to teach the difference? If you can understand that cat is an animal, does it matter if you say cat or cut? Doesn't really matter too much. So weak forms are things like prepositions, to, of, and from. When we say them in a sentence, we often say them very weakly. I do say this. So, for example, I'm going to the shop. I'm going to the shop. I don't say I'm going to the shop. I say I'm going to the shop. To. To is an example of a weak form. I have lots of suggestions. I don't say lots of suggestions. I say lots of. Okay, so I do use these weak forms, but many learners of English don't. They pronounce the whole word. Okay, I think it's important to raise awareness of this. I don't think it's important to insist that learners use this, because not everybody does. And other features like assimilation. If you're very, very interested in pronunciation and studied it a lot, you probably know what assimilation is. This is when words, sounds assimilate into the next word. So, for example, is the assimilation of, if we look at the phrase red paint, we often, if we say it together, red paint, we say red paint. So the D becomes a B because it's assimilating into the next word. Now, this is interesting. As a linguist, I like studying this and I like teaching this for listening. But is it important to insist our students say this? No, I don't think so. Okay, next one. Exposure to different Englishes. Now, based on what I was saying before, so we looked a little bit about pronunciation. Oh, first of all, sorry, I noticed some chats. I'm just going to respond to some of these. Geographical, racial, yeah. Is it good to teach standard American accent instead of British English here in Venezuela? My answer to that, Burleson, is I would say teach, first of all, your English, because you as an English teacher, your English is very good. So teach your English. If your students are very likely to go to encounter American English, then that's probably more useful than British English, to be honest. But you need to teach what is important for your students, right? So let's have a look at exposure to different languages. Here's an activity that I do with my students. I put them into groups and I assign them to countries. I ask the students to watch a news report from these countries. This is an activity for high-level students, okay? So I would say B2, upper intermediate plus. Then they have to listen to each report and they note down the vocabulary and the differences in pronunciation, or what they heard is different. Then students present to the class a synopsis of the report and maybe the 4 most important differences found in the varieties of English. How to do this? Well, for example, here in this next slide, which I will share with everybody, here are some countries of news reports. So here's, is the India version of the BBC, for example, the version of Ireland of the BBC, the version from New Zealand of the BBC, and the version of Singapore. And these news websites have videos of presenters from those countries. So I would ask the students to watch 2 and highlight the difference and identify the differences in pronunciation. So similar to what I was showing you in previously, the difference between British and American, do the same between Indian and Irish, or Irish and Singaporean, or New Zealand and Australian. Get the students to discover the differences, and you can, of course, give them some help. Okay, let's move on to the next one. For this activity, I'm going to share my screen again because you need audio. I'm going to show you the English that I speak. I was born in the 80s. I went to school in the 90s, and my English is not standard British English. I'm going to show you why, okay? So I'm going to show you a video. Can you give me a thumbs up?
Now, Alistair McGowan has been on a road trip of his own, looking at different accents from all around the UK.
On his latest journey, he goes in search of Cockney, but didn't find it where you might expect him to.
The East End of London is home to an accent that's famous all over the world.
The East End has given us film stars like Michael Caine, soap stars like Dot Cotton, footballers like David Beckham, style icons like David Beckham, underwear models like David Beckham.
But the Cockney accent is now under threat from a new kid on the block. Accent expert David Hornsby knows all about it.
So, David, here we are in the heart of the Cockney East End of London, but we're not going to be hearing that much Cockney today, are we? Is that right?
No, we're going to be hearing the new accent of the East End. It's called MLE, or Multicultural London English.
No, you're sort of mean porky pies.
It's like going through the back of mouth. How to speak now, it's just more relaxed. It's very different. One difference here is that I would have expected like the end was like we're saying, learn not to be H's, but
H comes on its way out.
Hackney, you said we're from Hackney. H is the back. Let's celebrate the H. H is the back, everybody.
The speed of MLE's progress is astonishing. Charlie speaks MLE, but his mum is Cockney.
Al, for instance, you say, like,
They all have to start talking, don't
Charlie.
they? I don't finish the words when they're talking. So you have to try and pick up what they're saying. That's what I think we have to do.
Right, it's just in my direction. It's like extraordinary important.
Don't tell on, it's exciting.
What really surprises me, though, is that the shape of the mouth produced that accent has changed so much. The whole thing has gone from the front of the mouth, like when he talks, to the back of the front when Charlie talks, and that is quite extraordinary, isn't it?
A lot of Cockney vowels are diphthonged. The tongue has to go on a little journey, whereas multicultural London English vowels are much more like monophthongs, so you keep your tongue still. So play becomes blee.
I'm here when Debbie's talking. There's a lot more movement of the mouth. Like when Charlie talks and when the girls are talking, it's sort of that thing that goes at the back.
Okay, so this was a video basically summarising multicultural London English. What's important about this? So not only is there a difference in accent between geographical areas, but now also between generations. So in this example, the son speaks very differently to the mother, because of the multicultural upbringing he has had. When I went to school, they had people from all around the world. I went to school with people from Jamaica, from Ethiopia, from Somalia, from France. I had some Mexicans in my school. The thing that's important is that accents and English changes. So teaching the standard English is not taking that into account. We're focusing too much on something which is going to change anyway. If you can use your QR code and you have used Quizlet, there is an activity here for you to match multicultural London English words, standard English words. Okay? Just take the link. You don't need to do it now because I'm going to continue, but here you can test yourself between the difference to see if you know, because probably you don't. Even though your English is fantastic, you probably don't know multicultural English words. And I do, because that was the English I learned. So I'll just give you 1 minute to scan this. Cultural, social status, race, age, all of these things make a difference, yeah. Yeah, Graham Norton's great. Sasha, yeah. Have your students listen to road rap. I like it. 3 and tree, beer and bear. What is important, right? Because beer is a different word to bear. So I need to be a bit careful with that. So you're talking about minimal pairs, right? Where they just have one sound different. I think that is quite important because it's important to be able to understand what you're talking about. You don't want to get that mixed up. Where necessarily it's not so, as long as it's intelligible, that's the important thing, right? Okay, so you've got that saved. Let's move on to the next one. Looking at international idiomatic expressions, okay? If you work with a business, a lot of actions, one activity I like to do is ask them to brainstorm in their group. So my students are nearly always Spanish speakers, excuse me. So they're from Mexico, Venezuela, from Colombia, or Chile. I ask them to brainstorm some idiomatic expressions which they have. I'll translate the expression and then to determine whether the expression makes sense in English or if an English speaker would understand it. And they present 1 or 2 ideas, okay? So let's look at some examples. I know that this is a complicated activity because here we have people from Venezuela, Colombia, Mexico, and Chile, and the idiomatic expressions are probably a bit different, right? But here are some examples. Estar en la luna is to be in the clouds. Ponerse las pilas, to get your act together, to be more energized. Echar algo al mar, to be a drop in the bucket. Pan comido, piece of cake. What I like about this activity, by translating idiomatic expressions and seeing if it could be understood. So, for example, echar agua al mar, if somebody says to throw water in the sea, we don't say that in English, but I understand, It's very similar to a drop in a bucket. Echar leña al fuego, so put firewood on the fire, is very similar to fuel on the fire, right? And the interesting thing about this is that you're kind of highlighting the differences between the way different people from different countries communicate. And it shows how the language is fluid, right? Matar dos pájaros con un tiro is basically the same. Kill 2 birds with 1 stone, right? So some of them are directly translatable. Hacer la vista gorda, turn a fat eye. Make a fat eye? No, I wouldn't understand it. It's turn a blind eye. So some of them can't be translated. It's important to realize. But it's an interesting discussion which gets people thinking. Now, one of the most useful strategies to learn is repair strategies. Okay. So what are repair strategies? These are phrases that we use when there is a break in the conversation, in the dialogue. We cannot prepare all students for all types of English. That's impossible. Let's focus on what are probably going to be the most useful. But you can prepare them for difficult situations with repair strategies. So asking for clarification. What do you mean by that? Are you saying this? In other words, do you mean this? These are phrases which we use asking for clarification. Checking understanding. British English is not that common, Did you understand me? Parroting other words. Repetition. These phrases are so useful preparing students for, speaking with anybody in any type of English, because you can prepare, you can fix the conversation. Here are some activities we use with these repair strategies. So you can write subtitles to a short video in a language not spoken by a class. I like to show my students sometimes a short dialogue from a Bollywood movie, from a film in a Bollywood movie. Bollywood movies, films made in India, right? I like to show a very short video, 30 seconds. And I ask the students to invent what they think they're saying. And by creating that dialogue, they need to include some repair strategies. So asking for clarification, repeating yourself, paraphrasing, things like this. You can role play a phone call with a bad line. I ask my students call each other on WhatsApp, and maybe put a t-shirt on the phone so you can't hear very well. You need to make a solution by using repair strategies. This happens in real life. Sometimes you can't hear people, right? So it helps. Verbal boxing. You ask to debate a topic, and the first time, when somebody hesitates, they're eliminated. So here you're practicing fluency. Write a dialogue that must include 4 repair strategies. You just write a normal dialogue, or you can role play a direct messaging conversation using 4 repair strategies. What's a direct messaging conversation? So, for example, talking to each other on WhatsApp through text, talking to each other through Teams, whatever application you guys use. And you can ask them to do this in class, but they must use these repair strategies. Okay. But this was an activity I wanted to do. I wanted to put you in breakout rooms. I wanted you to turn off your camera and your mics. And using the chat function of Zoom, you had to arrange what you're going to do on the weekend. You want to meet up and do something together. But student A is an introvert. Student B loves being outside and in the sun. Student C likes to party. So together you have to negotiate what you're going to do. And in that conversation, if there are any problems or difficulties, use repair strategies to help. So that's an activity. And that's where we're going to finish today. Thank you very much, everybody. It was very nice to meet you all. I hope you found this useful. And if you want to contact me, please do. I'm just going to write one more time my email in the chat. Thank you very much. Bye-bye, everybody.
Bye. Bye.